Hi, good morning, and welcome to the ZP Developer Zone live streaming. At this point, I always scramble to try and make sure that it is actually live streaming to you guys, so I will scramble and just make sure that's happening. But today is 8 a.m., it's the 13th of May 2021, and I'm coming from London, but I know many of you are obviously across the globe, so I'm delighted that you're joining us this morning. So the live streaming event today is really kind of intended to, yeah, and I can see it's streaming fine. It's really intended for our developers zone, and I just want to kind of summarize the developers zone. I will go quick because we only want to do this for 30 minutes. We want to keep it nice, brief, and compact. So let me just click it, right. Okay, so every week we do the developer zone. It's really driven by the forum. So there's a forum where people can ask questions, and I ask people to ask questions there, and then we kind of come in and answer them, let's say in this webinar. But if you want to join in on the chat and stuff, completely feel free. We're happy to have you. So this week, as I say, if people have questions of Zimmer and Peacock, I say join the developer zone. There's a really good forum there. It's really active with questions, and then we get in every week and we answer those questions. So thank you for kind of coming in today. So I had two questions this week. It's kind of nice because last week we did have a lot of questions, so it was nicer to be a bit lighter this week, but I do appreciate the questions. It's pretty cool, so thank you very much. So I just want to kind of say that one of the questions that came in was about fructose sensors, and another question was about the temperature effect on ZP pH sensors, and I actually ended up answering the question. I misread the question as the temperature effect on ZP glucose sensors, so I might have to do this twice, but stick with me and it might be interesting anyway. So question one was really about the fructose sensors. So at ZP we make fructose sensors. Fructose is a isomer with glucose. It's a structural isomer. So obviously same molecular weight, same formula as glucose, but it's structurally different. In the food and beverage industry, it's probably quite interesting to measure fructose. So ZP does have a fructose sensor. Now, the questioner was asking, I had said on one of our forums, oh yeah, look at that, we've got really good sort of activity towards fructose and really not much activity towards glucose. And the questioner was just a little bit, confused by that. So I just want to kind of answer the question a little bit that he had. He was a bit confused. So when you look at data like this, we have current versus time. So the first part of this was we test just in PBS. So it's just to get a sense. So we're just running a background in PBS, and then we add in a little drop of concentrated fructose. So we can essentially go from 0 millimolar fructose to 5 millimolar fructose. Hi Ali, good to see you, man, thank you. And then we also add in another drop then of fructose, so we go from 5 millimolar to 10 millimolar fructose. Now when you look in our raw data, we've done two experiments and we've overlaid them, but they're both fructose. So in both experiments we started with just PBS. We added a little drop of concentrated fructose, brought the total volume in the, let's say, cell to 5 millimolar. Then we added another drop and we brought it to 10 millimolar. And then we brought it to 15 millimolar. Then we brought it to 20 millimolar. Now this is the bit that caused the confusion. Is because in the LinkedIn post I said, oh well actually look, we hardly have any activity towards glucose. So what we did at the end was we'd gone 0 millimolar fructose, we'd raise it to 5 millimolar, 10, 15, 20, and so that all looked pretty good. We had these quite consistent steps. And then at the end, the engineers or scientists just added a drop of glucose, and you can see it, literally they did it here, and the signal is going on for 20 millimole glucose, sorry, fructose, and then we just add in a bit of glucose, and the signal, I mean, you know, I'd almost argue it didn't change, but you could argue there was a little change there. Now, I think to really understand that, we'd have to do experiments to make sure that we really were understanding this. But it's, you can see that if we add in glucose, we get maybe a tiny little change. But when you look at 5 millimolar fructose, the changes are like, you know, are much bigger. So you can, from this experiment, you could say that actually this sensor was, if I was going to give a worst case scenario, this sensor is about, for every millimole of fructose, maybe it's 20%, it has a 20% activity towards glucose. So it's much more sensitive to fructose than it is to glucose. And I think in many activities that would work. And if you really wanted to make a very active, a very accurate fructose sensor, you could actually put a true glucose sensor in alongside it and adjust the signal. But I just want to kind of say that, so if I just kind of back up slightly and sort of say, all right, in this kind of experiment, we do this quite a lot. If you're doing an enzyme type experiment, you would probably do the same. An enzyme-based sensor, you'd probably do the same. Start with 0 millimolar, add in a small drop, bring it to 5 millimolar fructose, 10, 15, 20. And then just for fun, the scientists actually did add in glucose, and the sensor hardly responded. And so that's why I was able to make the statement. It is very active towards fructose and hardly active towards glucose. So I just wanted to explain that experiment. So that was one of the questions that came in this week. It came in from Ali, and I appreciated him asking the question. It's probably worth saying, if you're doing experiments like this, then I'm going to do a demonstration later on of Julie, and I'll have done this sort of demonstration before, but it's a really, if you're doing experiments like this, then Julie will crunch your data really quickly. Now the second question, I read the question as, how does temperature affect your glucose sensor? And the question was actually, how does temperature affect your pH sensor? So I'm going to answer the question I read it as, rather than the question was, but I will maybe answer the pH part next week. Now, what's happening here is this, that at Zimmer Peacock, we make a lot of different types of glucose sensors, and we put them on our web store. Now, the data here was, I would call it a generation 1 glucose sensor, where the enzyme is immobilized on the electrode. So, you know, essentially the enzyme can't get away, so we can use it in a continuous operation. And then the data on this side is actually made with a wire sensor. I think these wire sensors were really invented about 1992 by a guy called George Wilson. And I've seen a picture of George Wilson. I realized I've met him on a few occasions, and I didn't realize it was him at the time. So, but I met the guy anyway. But this kind of wire sensor is what they use in CGM, continuous glucose monitoring products. So these products where, you know, they're on the upper arm, and there's a little white disc. They often have a filament or wire that's actually going into the body. Anyway, so we've been characterizing our ceramic base, or on our ceramic substrate glucose sensor, and on our wire sensor. And all we've done is we've put it in 3 millimolar of glucose, and then we've raised the temperature by 2 degrees, and the signals increase proportionately, which is super useful for us and super useful for our clients, because you know, one of the questions is what's the effect of temperature on a biosensor? And the nice thing is now we have that data, and you can see actually that the effect is quite large. Now, a lot of the time this doesn't really matter, because for example, this is a glucose strip here. That has a temperature effect, but in most, let's say, you know, in many environments, the temperature is fairly well contained. Well, you know, maybe it's sort of I understand, you know, different parts of the world, but let's talk about, like, you know, a European indoors system. The temperature might go from 18 to 25 degrees Celsius. Now, my temperature is a little bit misleading, because we're actually going from a very extreme temperature here. We're actually going from about 2 degrees to 15 degrees C, so that is an unusual temperature range. So really, to answer the question, what's the effect on temperature on a glucose sensor, we should be doing it over a larger range. because it might not just be linear, especially when you've got an enzyme. I mean, an enzyme-based sensor doesn't have a linear, it doesn't behave linearly with temperature. I mean, it gets, once you get beyond 37.5 degrees C, actually the enzyme will start denaturing. So you don't have, enzyme-based sensors are not just linear with temperature, but at least in this temperature range, there was actually sort of, it looks fairly linear with temperature. So let me get back to the original question now. The original question was, why does temperature affect your pH sensor? And as I said, I misread it as why does temperature affect your glucose sensor? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dig in and show you how I would analyze this. So first of all, when you look at a glucose sensor, you've got glucose diffusing. So diffusion has a temperature component, so remember that. You've got it reacting with an enzyme. So that's really a chemical reaction. So you have, essentially a reaction kinetics. And then unusually with a glucose sensor, you also have a heterogeneous electron transfer across an electrode, which also has a temperature relationship. So you have, in a glucose sensor, you've got many parameters that could be affected by temperature. It could be the diffusion that's affected by temperature. It could be the enzyme kinetics that are affected by temperature. Or it could be the heterogeneous electron transfer across the electrode that's affected by temperature. And also, just to confuse things a little bit, you can also have materials which maybe expand or shrink as a function of temperature. So if we had a barrier layer, that could also be affected by temperature. So the question is, why do you have a temperature effect in your sensor? And it's because I've listed in this conversation so far, diffusion has a temperature component in it, enzyme kinetics have a temperature component in them, heterogeneous electron transfer across an electrode has a temperature component in it, and that's not even thinking about the material properties like polymers, which may be swelling or shrinking as a function of temperature, and I'm not even going to start thinking about viscosity, which also has a temperature component in it. But I had a hunch, it's a personal hunch, that actually the biggest driver of the temperature effect in a glucose sensor was the enzyme. And I'll sort of, having a hunch, but I did a back of the envelope calculation, and just for your interest. So we took some of the data from the ceramic glucose sensor. I mean, the ceramic glucose sensors, as I said, they look like this, nothing too spectacular. And essentially you did this, look, at a temperature of 2 degrees Celsius, and I've had to put it in Kelvin, so that's 275.15 Kelvin, we get a current of 0.02 microamps. So that gives me my K1 and my T1. So my K1 is my rate. So my rate at 275 Kelvin is 0.02 microamps, and my rate is 0.04 microamps at about 12 degrees Celsius, which is about 285 Kelvin. So that's my K2, T2. Now what I'm going to do now is actually use a form of the Arrhenius equation. I'm not going to derive the Arrhenius equation. I think I actually can, but unfortunately I'm not going to do it today. But I'll show you what I did. Whoops a daisy. So essentially, if I know rates, so I know K1 and K2, and then if I know temperature, T1 and T2, R is the Rydberg gas constant, which is about 8.314. If I know these things, then I basically set up a little spreadsheet where I knew the gas constant. I didn't even check it up actually, I just did it from memory, so I might have to check that gas constant. So I may have to check that later on, but anyway, I knew the gas constant, I knew my rate at one of the temperatures, and I knew the temperature, I knew my other rate and the temperature. I essentially just wrote a little, I wrote that equation into the spreadsheet, and I calculated um, 44,236 joules per mole, or 44 kilojoules per mole. Now I'm doing this from memory, but that is actually the kind of temperature, the kind of activation energy associated with chemical reactions. So my hunch is that the reason that a glucose sensor has a temperature effect is because essentially it's a chemical reaction going on. Glucose gets converted to glucolactone. And therefore that has an activation energy. And I've been able to calculate the activation energy by using an Arrhenius equation. And I've been able to, I knew my rate, I knew my temperature, I knew my rate, I knew my temperature, I knew my gas constant, and I was able to calculate that if I have this kind of temperature, or this rate versus temperature, then that looks like I've got an activation energy of 44 kilojoules per mole. So that tells me that it looks like this is actually a chemical reaction. Now you could say, well, why do you think it's the chemical reaction linked to the enzyme and not the diffusion? And I'll tell you, and this is another back of the envelope calculation that says diffusion is proportional to temperature. There's also K in here, which is the Boltzmann gas constant, but it's a constant. So I got a constant 6 pi times viscosity times the hydration radius. But this is a constant, this is a constant, this is a constant, this is a constant, this is a constant. So I know that diffusion at a certain temperature is a constant times the temperature. And what I've done is I've actually taken the diffusion at 285 Kelvin, which is 12 degrees Celsius, and divided it by the diffusion at 275 Kelvin, and everything cancels apart from the two temperatures, because everything is a constant apart from the temperatures and the diffusions. So you end up with a ratio that says my diffusion at 285 Kelvin is equal to my diffusion at 275 Kelvin times 1.036. In other words, it's kind of saying the diffusion hardly changed with temperature. So when answering the question, why does for example, a biosensor have a temperature effect? To a guy like me, it's almost like it doesn't matter that it has a temperature effect, because I'm an industrialist. I just want to make a sensor and I'll characterize it and I'll compensate for the temperature. But if you want to know why, which is really a very academic question, then you have to think, a biosensor, it has a diffusion of the analyte to the sensor. So is my temperature effect due to diffusion? Is it due to that chemical reaction of the enzyme? Or is it due to the heterogeneous electron transfer across the electrode? So a back of the envelope calculation, just using an Arrhenius approximation, tells me that actually it's the activation energy is actually 44 kilojoules. It looks really much like a chemical reaction, and it's not the diffusion, because I wouldn't have had essentially a doubling in my signal if it was just the fusion, because the fusion would have only increased my signal by 0.036. It's not enough. I haven't ruled out that it was actually the electron transfer, because the rate of electron transfer, this looks similar to the Arrhenius equation. So in fact, I can't quite say, and I have to really think about this a lot deeper than this, that is my temperature effect due to the electron transfer across the electrode, or is it due to the enzyme kinetics? My hunch was it was due to the enzyme kinetics, and I can rule out the diffusion, but I haven't been able to yet figure out if it's actually just the heterogeneous electron transfer across the electrodes. And so I would consider this a question 2/3 answered, even though it wasn't the original question, because the original question was, why is a pH sensor temperature sensitive? And I can answer that quite easily by looking at the Nernst equation, but I haven't done that. I misread it and read it. Why is a biosensor, and therefore I think a glucose sensor, temperature sensitive? And I think it's because the enzyme is temperature sensitive. And this is not a bad justification for that opinion. Using this kind of Arrhenius approach to show you that the activation energy is about 44 kilojoules per mole. And if you look up activation energies associated with chemical reactions, that's on the low side. But it's in the right kind of range, and it's definitely not due to diffusion. So there you are. You ask a simple question, and you get a, one hell of an answer. And I do like being wrong, by the way. So if anyone is out there who's got, deeper insight, then I'm definitely happy to hear it, and even, and bring it to this as well. All right, I've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to touch on Julie, but I want to touch on how we're using Julie to really accelerate biosensor development. So I'm very much hoping that Shirley is online today. I know that Ali is, and Hasim is, and Hicham is. Shirley, if you're online, this is for you. So the mission for the developer zone and for ZP in general is, well, in my opinion, is to, sorry, I'm just going to move myself out of the frame slightly. It's to take large laboratory assays and reduce them down to point of care tests. So we want to take the complex and expensive and make it easy and low cost, so that everyone can essentially benefit from. And I appreciate Ali's comment. Thanks for the great explanation there. I appreciate it, because I know Ali is one of our forum members, and he's got a PhD in these, as like many of us, and he really understands this stuff. So I appreciate the comment. So our mission is to take the big and complex and make it low cost and cheap. So for example, if you have to use an HPLC to analyze a food sample, no, let's make a low cost handheld device for doing that. That's what we're about at ZP, and I think that's what everyone in the developer zone should be about. If you want to improve the world, give them sensors, let them test their health or their food easy and cheaply. Now we're doing AI assisted biosensor development. So what do I mean by that? I want to make the world's best electrochemical biosensors. I mean, at the moment we've got with our partner, we've got a COVID-19 sensor on the market, and it's doing really well, and it's in part due to this kind of philosophy. So this is it, right? So I have a drop of blood, or I have a sample of food, and I traditionally test it by taking that drop, putting it on a large GC mass spec or a large HPLC, which is my reference method, and I get a reference value. That's fine. Now what I want to do is I actually want to reduce it down to something like our food sense, which is where you can monitor the hotness of chili and the pungency of garlic. You can even detect E. coli on this guy. So it's small and low cost, or lower cost at least. And we also have an app that it works with. So they in Bluetooth communication, so the meter runs the assay and the app displays the data. And now that means you get an app value. Now of course, if we're doing a really good job on our meter and our sensor, then the app value should be really close to the reference value. Now a lot of the time at ZP, we're in development. So you've done some laboratory testing, which means that you've tested on buffers and things like that. But of course when you go into the real world, the samples can be much more complicated, much more dirty, much more variable. So you can have so what we want to do is we want to make our app value as close to our reference value as possible. So let's talk about how we do that. So we have an original sample, we test it on the reference method, we get a reference value. We take another part of the sample and we test it on the biosensor that we've developed, and that biosensor goes into the meter and we get the app value. So now we've got two values, reference value, app value, and we can actually answer the question, how well correlated are these things? But what we're really able to do, this, and I hope Shirley's online, this is what we're really able to do, is we're actually able to send the raw data off this app onto Julie. So now, I'll move myself slightly out of the way. So now we have, I'll just click back to here. We have cloud signal or cloud raw data. So in fact, we end up with the reference value, which is sometimes we call it, the gold standard. How is it done today? Then we have the app value, which is, the sample has gone onto our sensor and our meter and given us our app value. But because we're using smartphones, the raw data, in this case the cyclovoltammetry, has gone to the cloud. And so now we're actually able to look at the sample in three ways: the reference value, the app value, and the cloud signal. And we want the reference value and app value to be, essentially the same. So I'm going to sort of do it like this: that we have a reference value and an app value. We want a good correlation, a one-to-one correlation between app value and reference value. Now, sometimes those correlations in early development phases are not as good as you would want. But because we're sending the raw data to the cloud, we also have cloud signal, or what I call a cloud signal. It's literally the raw data behind the test that was done on the app in the field. And so what we're doing is we're taking the cloud signal, looking at it versus the reference value, and improving the app value. Because when you've got something that is essentially connected, to the internet. So because we're running, Julie's in the cloud. Julie is able to communicate via the web back to the app. We can send better algorithms to the app to actually improve our correlation with the reference value. So the workflow is this: you've got a sample, and you test it on the reference method, HPLC for example. You then also test it on the system that we've developed, and you get a certain correlation. But the raw signal went to the cloud, it went to Julie. And in Julie, we can then look at that raw signal and say, is there a better way of looking at that raw signal to make us better correlated with the reference value? And if there is a better way, that's a new algorithm, and the new algorithm can then automatically push to the app. So the app can in fact improve its correlation or its accuracy in the end over time. And that's the power of Julie. Now at the moment we're not, essentially this is our workflow. So I mean, if you're kind of doing a development or collaboration with Zimmer and Peacock, you will be getting involved in this kind of workflow of how we can actually improve the algorithm with time. And it's only possible because essentially we have, good meters, good app development, and good Julie. So I just want to kind of explain to you how we are getting better and better at essentially making better and better biosensors. I'm just going to do a quick demonstration, and I really realize that I've only got about 3 minutes, so I'm going to be pretty quick about it. I'm going to be very quick about it. In fact, first of all, if you're not on Julie, please get onto Julie. Julie can be found here. There's a learning center and there's a login. The learning center is good because on the learning center we actually have free data for you to try out on. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to bring in Julie. I just want to demonstrate to you very quickly. It is really simple. And all the time, the brilliant thing about ZP is we're using Julie all the time. So in fact, we're the ones using it the most and testing it and getting it better. So I just want to sort of show you. Look, I'm not going to say too much. I just want to very quickly say, look, if you are doing enzyme-based sensor development, I'm literally not telling you much here, but Julie is a great tool. You gather the data on your laboratory computer and your laboratory instrument. You upload the data to Julie, which is I'm just going to upload some data now. So that data is just uploading now. So it's pretty easy. So I'm uploading some chronoamperometry data. This is really what we did with the fructose sensor. How did we analyze the fructose sensor? We recorded some amperometry data in the lab. We then uploaded it. Julie's free. You can get yourself a Julie account anytime. And now I'm going to just show you. Choose the amperometry data here. And I'm just going to graph it first of all. So So this is like our fructose data. Here's the 0 millimolar PBS, and then we added in 10 millimolar of glucose, and we got, these are 3 sensors. So, you know, because I uploaded 3 experiments, so this is 3 experiments on 3 different sensors, and we got the data. Now I'm going to analyze it very quickly. So I'm going to actually right click this. That was a right click, okay? So I'm going to say at 0, that was 0 millimolar at that point. Whoops, I did that wrong. And I'm going to right click here. And I'm going to tell it that that was 10 millimolar. So now what it's done is it's essentially done me a best fit line. It knew that, you know, that was 0 and that was 10. And then it's calculated me, you know, a best fit line and told me, you know, that. And it's done it over all the 3 data sets. So I can sort of see my R² value, my standard deviations, my intercept, my limits of detection, my limits of blank. It's done a lot of statistical analysis for me, just like that. So all I want to say, and I know I'm running out of time now, if you don't have a Julie account, go to the knowledge base, go to Julie. Even if Julie's not ready, you know, you're not ready to use Julie now, just start getting these accounts, because Julie's going to get more and more powerful. And we did do a demo a few weeks ago about EIS, and I'm going to come back to EIS because actually it can do it and it is going to get better. So get an account, please. Register, get yourself some free data here, follow along and just do that chronoamperometry demo that I did, just to get familiar with it. So now I'm going to go back to my slides and say, you know, when you're doing data like this, Julie's pretty cool. I've run out of time. So thank you for the questions today. I do appreciate the feedback, Ali. I'm glad you liked it. I thought it was kind of interesting to look at how temperature actually can affect an enzyme sensor. I'm glad. I really appreciate Hitcham's comment about, you know, he found this very interesting. So that's kind of cool. I think it is, you know, this is the combination of biosensors, low-cost electronics, applications, and the cloud. If we're all doing this, this is really going to accelerate biosensor development. It's going to accelerate all of humanity development, but including biosensor development. And I'm glad I just wanted to do a kind of repeat Julie demo and just encourage you to get onto it. So it's 8:32 here in the UK. Thanks Hasim, Hitcham, and Ali for the comments today. And yeah, put your questions in the forum, and I will. And by the way, we do a live streaming webinar also at 8 p.m. London time. But I know many of you now, and that's 8 p.m. on Sundays now. We do one as well, but I know many of you are in Asia, so it's a bit late for you guys. Anyway, thanks very much, and I will speak to you all soon. All right, take care. Bye bye.